Hi, Florida. Being poor is not fun and it's not funny. Not having enough food to eat or enough food to feed your child or your children is not fun and it's not funny. Being afraid of being on the street homeless because you can't afford to pay for a roof over your head is not fun and it's not funny. A lot of people live like that in Florida. A lot. I'm not one of those people, but I know what it's like to be one of those people. Because when I was born, my parents were young and very modest, economically speaking. My father worked as a superintendent in a building in the Bronx, in New York City. I have clear memories of my father shoveling coal to in the middle of the winter so the entire building could have heat. I was little. I believe I was pre-verbal, meaning, 3 or 4 small words, but not like articulating conversation. But I remember my father shoveling coal into this area to heat up the building. I remember that. I remember having to, my mother sleeping with us at night so that the rats who were eating through the walls would not bite us at night. And she would cover us with coats and blankets because the landlord didn't give enough heat. Now, obviously, here in Florida, this is not an issue of heat. It's not a problem. If anything, it's heat is the problem. People need air conditioning, not more heat. In most parts of Florida, although they're not Florida, can also get quite cold. But my point is this: being poor is not fun and it's not funny. And when you're poor, I remember feeling embarrassed and ashamed. I remember what that feels like. Not as a child. I had no awareness of that as a child being poor. And actually, my parents did a very good job of providing for us. We never went hungry. We had clothes and stuff like that. But I do know what it's like to go hungry when I became a single parent. I do know what it's like not to be able to afford an ice cream cone for my son, who's 5 years old. I remember that. Or how can I not remember that? I remember at the time they called it food stamps. Now they call it SNAP. And how embarrassed I was to go to the grocery store and be in the queue, waiting in line to pay and having to take out the food stamps. Now it's a card. I would take out these little strips of paper. Being poor is not fun and it's not funny. And it's scary. And it's scary not to have enough money to feed your child. It's scary not to have enough money to pay your bills. It's really scary when you know you can't afford to have a roof over your head. It's scary when you see other people that you know that are going through the same thing. And they're losing everything. And I remember what that feels like. So when I see people struggling, I you know, I think about how this is not okay, that we are in such a powerful country. We are a powerful country. We're wasting tons of money, but we're not going to go there right now. A very powerful country, very wealthy country. And yet somehow, those of us who are poor, who have been poor, or who are currently poor, and by poor I mean financially, because you can be rich in culture and in love and in other things, in talent and intelligence, and which I was. But you can also be very poor physically, financially, not have resources. And that's very scary. And when politicians don't really feel that at their core, which in my experience, because I'm an ordinary person, I've never run for office before. In my experience, most politicians really don't give a you know what about people who are that poor, because they think that people who are that poor don't vote, and people who are that poor don't have influence. The politicians think that because you're poor, you can't think. They think that because you're poor, you're not smart. They think because you're poor, you can't make decisions about what's in your best interest. That they can just sort of lie and manipulate and, do whatever they do. They don't treat the wealthy people that way. People who have money, people who can contribute to their campaigns, they see them differently. But I grew up in a very modest family. But like I said, when I became a single mom, I struggled. But I was determined to get an education, and so I was on welfare at one point while I was a student, and I was on welfare, and I was a single mom, and I could not afford to buy my son an ice cream cone many times at the end of the month. I just didn't have the money, and I was so poor that I took toilet paper from the university where I was going, because I couldn't afford to buy the toilet paper at home for my child and for myself by the end of the month. That's poor. That's being really poor. And as your governor, I promise you that I will make sure that we move heaven and earth. We have a lot of money. It's a question of priorities, okay? That we, as a state, and as good moral people, do the right thing to make sure that children have food to eat and they have a roof over their heads, and that we support their families so they can move ahead and progress. I'm not talking about, people, kicking. People have this notion that if you're poor, you're lazy. There are lazy people in this world, of course. And some of those lazy people are poor, and some of those lazy people are not poor. As simple as that, right? But the fact of the matter is that having empathy and compassion and a determination to do what's right by people, because you can have all the empathy in the world and compassion in the world, but unless you're really going to work to help people so they can progress by having policies and laws and rules and the financial support that people need so they can get ahead. Because I predict that we are heading towards very tough times, tougher than we have right now. We think it's tough. This is not tough. Tough times are going to come when AI makes a lot of people unemployable. When AI puts people in a situation they don't have a way to make money. And I want to be your governor because I see that coming. And I know enough about technology, and I care enough about ordinary people to make sure that I move heaven and earth as your governor to protect you. Because at the end of the day, that's what people need. You need a governor who's going to move heaven and earth and be relentless to do what's right, to lift us all up, okay? Because it really is not a smart idea for some people to do very well and other people to do so poorly that they have to resort to God knows what in order to eat. Because sooner or later, you're going to run into those people. We know that. You or somebody you love. Anyway, that's a little mini introduction into my life. Thank you, Florida, and God bless you all.